Hi, my name is Scott. Welcome to pre-drilling and reaming a precision rifle barrel chamber. So we are starting with a tenon for a Kelly's action, and I won't go into detail about turning the tenon down and threading it. That I can do in a separate video. This is just about pre-drilling the chamber and reaming the chamber itself and finishing it. So this is a Krieger barrel blank we're starting on. We have the barrel threaded now for the receiver to fit onto. And now I'm going in with a drill bit. So the chamber we're cutting is for a 25 Creedmoor. We're going to be using an Alpha Munitions carbide reamer. So to start with, this is just a high-speed steel drill bit, and the size of it is about 20 thousandths of an inch smaller in diameter than the narrowest part of the body of the case. So in a Creedmoor case, up towards the shoulder, the dimension I forget specifically, but it's around 0.460 inches at the front of where the shoulder is, at the front of the body of the case. So in this case, we're going to ream this out to this drill bit. The diameter is roughly 0.437, I think. And so you can see we're finished pre-drilling it now. We went in 1 inch, and that's just deep enough that the pilot on the front of the reamer will still be engaging in the rifling ahead of where we pre-drilled before the shoulder of the reamer starts contacting and cutting at the back end of our tenon. So now you can see we have finished the pre-drill, and we are going on to cut a little bit of diameter away again with a boring bar. So this boring bar is meant to true up the hole that we just drilled. Regular high-speed steel cheap twist drills like this don't necessarily cut very straight, so we're gonna make it slightly bigger just by truing it with this boring bar now. So I'm going in to the bottom of my hole, finding where the end of my hole is just by feel with the machine off, because it's not that none of these are critical dimensions as far as the depth at this point. So I'm just going in by feel with the boring bar until it bottoms out of my hole, and then touching off on the side of the inside of the ID of this pre-drill, and then I'm taking a pass out, and I'm only taking about 5 thousandths at a time in 2 passes. So the caliper measured like, let's say 0.438 before we started doing this boring. I'm going to take 2 passes totaling 10 thousandths more cutting total. So we started at 0.438 with the drill bit. After we take 2 5 thousandths passes, our finished pre-bore that has now been bored out is going to end up being around 0.448. And like I said in the beginning, the chamber dimension that I'm looking for at the smallest point is 0.460. So now we're going to start reaming after this, and our reamer is only going to have to cut about 10 or 12 thousandths of actual diameter for the first inch, because I went about an inch on the pre-bore. And the reason I'm doing that is because on the front of this reamer now is a live pilot. So it's a pilot that is exactly the tight bore diameter, and so it rides snug inside the bore up ahead of where it's cutting to keep it centered in the bore. So at this point, if I went more than an inch or so on the pre-drill, that pilot would not be engaging in rifling ahead of where the reamer would now be cutting. So in this case, an inch is fine, because about half of my pilot, the front half of the pilot, is engaging in rifling ahead of where I'm cutting before the shoulder of the reamer even starts cutting at all. So it's stabilized from the front, making the risk of having chatter with this reamer very, very low. So now for these first couple of passes with the reamer, because the reamer's cutting such a small amount of material away, I'm cutting probably a 1/4 inch at a time or more, big long passes, because there's not that much chips for the reamer to try to clear out. I'm not worried about that at this point. So I'm taking some big passes just to get to the depth where my shoulder will start contacting the front of my pre-drill area, and I'll start cutting full diameter with the reamer here. So moving forward, we are cutting with the reamer now. We're at full cutting depth, so I'm past my pre-bored area, and the reamer's cutting away all the material at this point. So I'm taking small passes, 50 or 100 thousandths at a time, mostly just going by feel. I have the lathe slow. It's only running about 70 RPM, I think, and that's on purpose, because the faster you go, the the easier it is to start getting chatter. You can see the go gauge sticking out of the back of the barrel at this point. That was me checking. I didn't do it on camera. I wish I would have, but I'm checking now in between passes every once in a while for the headspace dimension. So the final depth that I'm going to cut to is on the print for the action, and I know what that number needs to be, and so intermittently I'll take the go gauge and measure my headspace number and see how many more thousandths I need to go with my reamer to get to full chamber depth for the action to headspace properly onto this barrel. We're coming up on getting towards our last pass here. And for this last pass, I think I took about 20 thousandths on this last pass, so I'm doing a pretty small peck for that last bit just to make sure I have a nice good surface finish on that final pass with no chip interference. So now we've moved on to, we think we're at the full depth. We're going to now check with the action after I've measured the headspace with the depth micrometer. In this case, my headspace goal was to be exactly 2 thousandths over the headspace gauge, because this action gets used for multiple barrels, and I already have a couple of barrels that I want to match this chamber's headspace to exactly. And so I'm starting with a piece of tape that's Scotch tape, is 2 thousandths thick. So I have one piece of that tape on the back of this go gauge. I'm now going to feed that into the chamber and try to close the bolt. Now what you're going to see is that the bolt will close on it, but it's quite snug, and the bolt handle will not fall freely. There's no firing pin assembly in this bolt, so the bolt handle would just fall totally free with no resistance if that tape was not contacting. So the fact that the bolt handle is snug here tells you that you're just touching at 2 thousandths, which is exactly what I want to do. So now I've taken the tape off of the go gauge, and now the bolt handle, you can see, falls freely with zero resistance, which means that my chamber is deep enough but not too deep. And now I am essentially finished with the chamber, and I'm going to go back in with my dial test indicator and reach into the front of the throat where the rifling begins, and so you can see that the needle was bouncing back to zero every time that it falls into a groove. Every groove is reading the same. So you can see that there's no run out up in the throat. Now I'm backing out into the neck, measuring the neck, and there's no run out or anything weird going on there. And now I'm into kind of the front of the body of the case. I'm going to dial in until I get contact, spin it around here, and again you'll see no run out at all. It's completely straight. So we've verified that there's no run out in the chamber. That's great. And now we want to verify that we didn't oversize the chamber. Now if your reaming tools were set off of center, or something was wrong with the way you had your reamer set up, you could potentially make an oversized chamber that's still straight. So if your tail stock that you're using to hold the reamer holder was way off center, or you weren't using a floating reamer holder, or the floating reamer holder wasn't working like it's supposed to, your chamber could still be straight, but at the base of the case it would be oversized. The print for this case says 4714 is the web diameter, is what it's supposed to be. And so you can see I've stuck a 471 pin gauge in here, and it does go in a little ways, like maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and that's what we'd expect. And the 472 pin gauge now, you're going to see, will go in just slightly. Like there's a chamfer I've manually cut that I didn't film here on the back of the barrel here, just to aid in feeding and not scratch your brass up. And so it will go into that, but it won't go even more than 5 or 10 thousandths past that. And that's exactly what we're looking for. We've proven now that our chamber is appropriately sized and has no run out. Both of those are important checks to make. And now we're just going to do a visual inspection with the bore scope before we pull this barrel out of the lathe. You want to look at the whole chamber to make sure you don't see anything weird, and especially you want to look at the throat to make sure every landing groove has a nice square corner on it and there's no rough marks. And they're all nice and even. And this one looks really good. And that is going to wrap up the end of this video. Thanks for watching.